Chapter 2. From Lowlands to the Highlands, Ulster Province, the lands of Clan Knox. I carry a greater load dead than alive. While I lie, serving many men, if I were to stand, I should serve a few. If my entrails are torn out to lie open out of doors, I bring life to all, and I give sustenance to many. A lifeless creature which bites nothing. When loaded down, I run on my way, yet never show my feet. What am I? Connacht, Finlay, and Lachlann wandered across the well-worn dirt roads of the forested lowlands, also known as the Dun forest of Clan Knox. They travelled with the shelter wagon people across the well-worn dirt roads of the lowlands. Connacht also hefted a mighty ancestral greatsword, known as a claymore, sheeted in a fine leather hilt upon his left shoulder. Lachlann and Finlay now bedecked fine armoured coats of chain and scale mail after acquiring so many silver rings from the dead giant. The land was speckled with great, ancient oaks bearing fat, bronzed acorns on their boughs. The Knox clan farmers could be seen with their herds of swine. They were using the humble billhook to strike the boughs of the trees, to knock the fat acorns from the oaks. The swine would wait, and then devour the acorns greedily. This oak forest was truly ancient, and tended to by the members of Clan Knox, but other trees grew among the oak, like the golden-leafed sycamores, pine and fir trees in the higher latitudes. Various other trees grew along the ravines, glens, riverbeds, and lowlands, such as crabapples, wild cherries, chestnuts, and the flowering dogwoods. The trees had various lovely rust-colored lichens growing on their boughs, especially on the oaks. Strangely enough, many of the oaks were shattered or split in twain with great scorch marks in the areas they split. Lachlann turned to Connacht. What split these oaks? Witchcraft. Connacht smirked. Nay, lad, though there is magic in the Isles of Samhian. Honest to gods, natural events split these mighty oaks. Lightning from the storms that emanate in the solstice seas, or even from the deep Ginnungagap ocean. These storms come in the cool spring or cold winter as massive cyclones with one great eye of the storm, and generate so much power and energy. Then something within the oaks draws their thunderous might, and they get split in twain. I have seen it since a wee lad. Finlay looked in surprise. Aye, sirrah, but looketh. Saporlings yet spring again from the felled giants, oaks. And he pointed at bushes and saporlings growing from a shattered stump. Connacht nodded his head. Aye, lad, for ye see that oaks do not just live above ground, but much of them lives underneath. When burned by fire or split asunder by lightning, they can regrow their top half once again, deep from the starchy reserves in their massive tap roots. Their roots grow so deep they can tap into nearby creeks several feet away, or even underground pools of water. Their roots are also incredibly mighty and can crush large boulders into nary but fine powder, of course over quite some time. Connacht continued, when a foul blight struck down the fields of potatoes and barley of Clan Gunner and Clan Knox during the long years of the clan civil war, our people talked to the ancient druids, and they taught us a way of boiling acorns, hurling out their poisons, and then grinding the boiled nuts into a fine flour to make bread. This acorn bread literally saved our people from what would have been a terrible famine. Plus, acorns fatten up hogs incredibly quick. The oak is truly a sacred tree that deserves much respect. It is said that in the deep forests, certain giant oaks are labeled biles, and that druids write on the trunks of these mighty trees in their ancient language of Ogma. The word druid comes from two ancient Caledonian root words, dru meaning oak, and vid meaning truth or wisdom. Some rumors even say the mightiest of oaks and other trees are actually a race of sleeping giants known as the Firbolg. But alas, there are so many myths throughout all of Caledonia that it's hard to determine what is truth and what is merely a convenient story to confuse inquisitive children. Connacht smiled. The dirt road followed a creek inn as it winded its way through the ancient oaken forest. Connacht noticed an elderly woman with a crooked back, wearing a long green dress, who sat on the side of the road on a large slate boulder. Her baskets had various ground vegetables like radishes, potatoes, carrots, sunchokes, dandelions, stinging nettle, turnips, onions, cabbage, beets, and kale. Several small children gathered around her, their faces masked with rags and their bodies heavily covered. Many of them peeled potatoes. "Oi, auntie, how much for some potatoes and sunchokes?" inquired Lachlann. "The name is Auntie Una, and the potatoes are 1 copper a pound. The sunchokes are 1 copper per 2 pounds, Auntie Una said. Her face was heavily wrinkled, and she lifted herself up on a oaken shillelagh. "All right, might as well buy 4 pounds of potato and 4 pounds of sunchoke." Lachlann gave Auntie Una 8 coppers. "Not only are ye a brave kern, but a generous lad as well, bless ye." Auntie Una smiled, her eyes sparkling. Connacht chuckled. "Can I pay ye in cold iron coins for some radishes?" He pulled forth 4 coins of iron, with the symbol of a king with a crown of horns. "Nay, take that accursed iron money and hurl it into a loch of Lennox," Auntie Una screamed. Connacht guffawed. "A jest, auntie, a jest. I shall give thee 4 coppers for some radishes." Auntie Una gave him a dirty look. "Listen here, ye Gallogalus. You know, and I know that kind of humor could get you killed or bewitched." With that, she snatched his copper coins and gave him just 2 radishes. "Don't worry, auntie. Your secret and your children's secret is safe with me." Connacht laughed. Auntie and all her children stopped what they were doing and scowled at Connacht. Auntie Una approached Connacht and looked him dead in the eyes. "Listen, brute, if you find a cauldron of silver coin in the wilderness of the Calhoun highlands, just remember it's mine, but I shall reward ye half once it's delivered to me. I have a corn dolly of Lugnaza, said to protect a person from any fell magics. Sounds like you old tale of the Cluracan who steals pots of silver and gold from sweet old crones that dwell in villages." Connacht chortled. Auntie Una scowled at him. "Be respectful, lad. Honor our glamour and silence. The banal ones don't need to have the veil lifted upon their dreaming," she said. "Just remember, Lord Connacht, never forget a debt and death before dishonor, for beauty is life, and love shall conquer all." Auntie Anna looked directly into Connacht's eyes, and her eyes seemed to almost glow a faint azure blue. "Aye, auntie, I know these ancient tenets, and respect the glamour." "Pardon my mischief," said Connacht. "Ah, Sirrah, I forgive thee. Trickery is always appreciated, as is a good jest," smiled Auntie. Connacht, Lachlann, and Finlay waved goodbye to Auntie Una and her strange children and continued their journey with the shelter across the lowlands on a dirt road. They came to a fork in the road, with one path going uphill into a landscape of scrub oak, heather, sage, and occasional glens of great pine trees. Thick, milky mist covered the higher elevations from eyesight, and only the occasional fir tree or great hilltop peeked from the misty low-flying clouds. Lachlann turned to Connacht. Something was strange about Auntie and her children. Connacht smiled. "Between the 3 of us, they were not human." Finlay turned about and gasped. "Are you saying they were fey folk?" Connacht nodded in agreement. True, they were relatively harmless fey folk, either neutral hearth fey or even possibly seelie fey. Show them respect and honor your debts, and they will leave thee be or protect ye. Be careful of them when dealing with the unseelie fae, though, for they are savage and only wish vengeance against humanity from times before history was even recorded. Thankfully, they seem to live either beneath the earth or in the dark lands beyond the borders of the 12 Duns. Lachlann looked puzzled when Auntie Una said, "Never forget a debt and death. Before dishonor for beauty is life, and love shall conquer all." What did she mean by that? Connacht turned to Lachlann with a serious look. That is how she revealed herself in a subtle way. To never forget, a debt is important to they fae, especially the Seelie. Debts and oaths empower their magic, which they call glamour. The Seelie fae actually might have created chivalry, and hence their oaths are so powerful that they would choose death before dishonoring it. Though they are very shrewd as to when they give an oath, it is currency to them. They also believe in beauty in all things, and that love of the beautiful shall conquer all, even if that means loving someone who can be beautiful with in their heart. For the Seelie are said to be beautiful of heart, but the unseelie are only beautiful of body. Several hours later, as twilight approached, the shelter wagons were leaving the river valleys and grass vales of the lowlands, but they haven't quite reached the flowering heather-covered hills and pine forests of the highlands just yet. They traversed these borderlands as the sun was already waning in twilight. As evening set in, the shelter wagon village stopped and camped nearby a village known as Kirk Yetholme. The village was right on the shores of a large loch or lake. This loch was called Loch Rannoch, and it was more known for being very long but not very wide. For the villagers of Kirk Yetholme could see across the body of water to the forested hills of the other side of Loch Rannoch, and a strong swimmer could swim across it in an hour. Though small, this village was well defended. Each bastille house formed from great boulders of granite, slate, and mortar, and all centered around a large bonfire. The whole village was surrounded by a thick wooden wall of stout pine logs and towers for archers. At night, the sheep and swine were herded through a wooden gate into the inner courtyard of the village. The houses and walls were already decorated for the upcoming Samhian festival, with several carved turnips, squash, and pumpkins carved into ghoulish jack-o'-lanterns. The tallow candles alight and glowing a dark, eerie orange. Especially the candlelight was almost dancing about hauntingly during the night. The villagers also constructed a humble wicker man, similar to a scarecrow but much larger and far more robust, from the pine and fir wood which grew on the hillside. Much of the wood and brush was already dead and dried. This effigy would be burned during the night of Samhain, said to drive away the wicked fae and spirits of the dead. The village, though humble, also seemed mysterious, yet welcoming, with the orange light of the jack-o'-lantern and the green, eerie light of the fireflies. The forests nearby were an interesting combination of oaks and pines. The ground cover also had an interesting mix of the heather brush and wild grass. This region was truly a fusion of both highland and lowlands. The loch itself is a famous landmark of the colder alpine highlands, but just further east and south were various marshes where many waterfowl rested in the weeping willows and sycamores that surrounded the marsh, this being a clear sign of the environment of the lowlands. Connacht looked out to Bonnie's wagon to the other side of the Loch Rannoch as the sun finally set. He could hear the long, mournful cries of loons and the chorus of frogs croaking in the tall grass near the lake. Throngs of fireflies began dancing in the moonlight as the full moon appeared in the horizon. "Ah, sweet Bonnie lass, nights like this are truly enchanting." He sighed in amazement. Bonnie smiled. "Enchanting is putting it mildly." She wrapped her plump, soft arm around his dense, powerful arm and held him close. Connacht smiled. I am excited for this great wedding between Lord Hjalmar and Lady Rona. We are only a few days before arriving to the Calhoun stronghold. I am friends with Lord Duncan. Bonnie's smile faded a bit. You know, Lord Duncan personally executed a whole tribe of Shelta folk during the clan wars. Connacht's smile soured. Yea, he slayed the entire and Jay, the Goose tribe. We had to incorporate the survivors in your Knox lands into our tribe. Bonnie lass, Connacht frowned. That war was truly horrible. And Duncan was an ally of our clan, and the Luchtgi were simply bringing in food rations to feed the army of pikemen from Ivar lands. They got caught up by a furious warband from Clan Calhoun, enraged from Makivar raids that ravaged the highlands of that realm. Connacht had tears of guilt gently pouring down his cheeks. Sweet Bonnie, when I become lord of my impoverished highlands, I swear unto thee that the Shelta people and the many exiles across the Samhian Isles will be able to find sanctuary in our lands. Connacht smiled, and Bonnie smiled back, teary-eyed, never before offered sanctuary for her people. She was never offered so much generosity from the local people of Samhain, and felt something skip a beat in her heart, like magic. As Bonnie's wagon approached, the Shelta folk called out, "Graze grist," and their horses came to an abrupt halt. They camp outside of the village in a nearby fallow fields. The Shelta tinkerers began to take out their anvils and hammers, pounding out tin and ore, cutting the giants multiple silver rings in smaller chunks, which they began to fashion in torques, coins, brooches, rings, and other forms of jewelry. The local villagers wandered by and started buying the jewelry, selling smoked meats, small barrels of cider, flirting with the seductive Sheltae women, teasing the handsome, swarthy lads, and even dancing with the exotic ladyboys who were all of 20 summers or more. They began drinking, dancing around a campfire, and eventually paying for a passionate night of love. The ouds and lutes, the tambourines and harps played wild songs of passion and mystery. As the weekend of revelry wore on, Connacht, Lachlann, Finlay, and a flirtatious Shelta harlequin named Llewellyn were sitting near a campfire next to the local peasantry of Kirk Yetholme. They shared some champagne and the irony-flavored blood sausage with rye bread. Hearty food, mixed well with the sour yet sweet local jam made from local marsh cranberries. One of the villagers began to speak. Damn shame the marsh has become. God's damned bog leapers have crawled into the place. It was already a treacherous place with the basket weaver that lurked there, but he mostly stayed sedentary in the southernmost pond of the marsh, he bemoaned. Connacht raised his eyebrow. Hear that, lads? Sounds like some dark fey plague, these fine folk. I want you to tackle this problem by yourselves. Just watch out for bog leapers. Their jaws are powerful enough to rip an arm off. They hide in shallow waters, then ambush sheep, hogs, children, hounds, and even drunken fishermen. Llewellyn, a lithe, long-haired, and extremely pretty harlequin, slid next to Finlay and whispered in his ear, "Listen, handsome, let's help these humble farmers, for they can in turn honor a debt they owe us, and this village could be a sanctuary for the Shelta. I have an excellent idea for thee. We can slay this whole pack of monsters with a clever trap." Finlay smiled and turned to the villagers. "If we kill these bog leapers, will you in turn give sanctuary to this tribe of wandering Shelta peoples?" The gathered farmers looked at each other, weary from the threat of the nearby bog, nodded their heads in agreement. One farmer spoke up. "If you kill the lot of them, I shall give you a whole wagon filled with smoked sausages, cheeses, as well as several barrels of cider." Connacht looked at Finlay, Lachlann, and Llewellyn, and he smiled. "Sounds like a good deal, lads and lassie," he said as he smiled, then playfully winked at Llewellyn. "Here is a secret of bog leapers. They are very aggressive when they smell fish oil or tallow that they unthinkingly pounce right out of the pond. If there are hidden spears in brambles or brush, you can impale the lot of them as they fling themselves at their prey," Connacht said sagely. "Silver Fox, you are wise as you are strong," smiled Llewellyn, and she led Finlay and Lachlann off towards the southern marshes. "Finlay, don't forget this," and Connacht threw his claymore, still sheathed, towards Finlay, who caught it with one hand. "Impaling doesn't always kill them. They can regenerate surprisingly fast. Also, don't forget that speaking to a basket weaver is generally better than trying to fight them. They are surprisingly deadly enemies when roused. Just remember that this sword thirsts for blood. It was rumored to have been the very sword of the famous berserker of the early Bronze Age, Llewellyn, as he was tied to a massive stone during his death. "Do not draw it in vain," warned Connacht. Lugard MacConroy flung 3 deadly spears. Each one struck true, robbing 3 kings of their years. Cuchulainn roared in pain. His stomach split asunder. His body warped. His bones broke like thunder. Reformed he did, but now a rampaging giant. He fought furiously to his death, always defiant. He tied himself to a boulder to die standing. His death was soon. This is what he was understanding. Queen Medb's army attacked, but our hero slayed many. 3 days and nights he fought at Kilkenny, until the Raven of Morrigan landed on his shoulder, and then his corpse fell from that accursed boulder. Connacht recited, "There, lads, that poem should silence the bloodthirsty spirit of Cuchulainn, who died after standing and fighting for 3 days." Finlay looked shocked. The power of the poem moved him greatly. The full moon was rising in the night sky. The grass fields and oaken glens were illuminated by silvery and azure moonlight. Wild grass as tall as a man surrounded many of the glades and fields that led to the marsh. Finlay, Llewellyn, and Lachlann marched through the well-worn dirt road on the way there. Schools of green, glowing fireflies danced along the wooden posts, separating one farmer's field from another. As they could see the great soggy area of ponds, marshes, and bogs before them, one tree in the marsh suddenly stood much higher than the rest and was far more massive. Of all the trees, this was truly unusual. It was a titanic sycamore, possibly 100 feet tall. Llewellyn gasped, "Oh, a Biles tree. We must get closer so I can read its script." She smiled, performed a cartwheel, and playfully skipped and pranced her way to the behemoth tree. They cleared the marsh, leaping from large riverstone to riverstone to get to the massive tree. Finlay and Lachlann could hear the large toads croaking and the tiny frogs chirping as they neared in, brushing back the loose leaves of several weeping willows to approach to the dark, shady undergrowth of this behemoth sycamore. Llewellyn reached out in her multicolored checkered coat. With her white linen gloves she touched the tree, and she closed her eyes. She could feel the throbbing between her eyes and opened her mind's eyes, chanting "Sham." Once the third eye was open, she could see the tree's magnificent aura of radiating blue and green, peaceful, calm, happy, spiritual colors. She then whispered, "Yam, Yam," repeatedly until her heart chakra opened and she could feel it, the powerful snoring and pulsing heartbeat of something mighty, something huge, peacefully sleeping, both below the tree but also being one with the tree. Suddenly she willed, she asked firmly but politely, for the swarming fireflies to surround the tree and illuminate it. At first they heard her plea, but she kept begging them over and over within in her mind, and more began to approach her and the mighty tree she touched. Suddenly they began to slowly swarm the tree, gently flying about the cottonwood colossus and illuminating areas of stripped bark with a strange system of writing, a series of long and short scratch marks which intercepted each other. The orange and green glowing insects illuminated the azure blue of the moonlight. She opened her eyes and she smiled. "Look at all the Ogham written upon this sacred tree. Let me fetch some coal and parchment from my satchel," she beamed at Finlay. Finlay was stunned with the beauty of the whole thing, so many lovely little fireflies dancing around these epic and majestic trees, but the tree itself was etched, scarred with so much of this bizarre writing. Long scars intersected with little scars, the little scars starting from the top but leaning down to the left or right, and this was in No as the secret language among Druids, or as the Nordics called them, witches. Llewellyn quickly placed pages of parchment atop these etchings and swiftly rubbed charcoal on the paper. Suddenly, much of these strange writings were quickly transcribed onto the parchment pages that she used. She finished and quickly rolled the pages and placed them back in her satchels. Bonnie and my fellow coven of sisters would love reading these incantations and stories written upon such a sacred and ancient tree. Many of them first planted in the earliest of eras by the Firbolg themselves, or around the battles of Maeg Tuired, as the rumors go anyways. She smiled. Finlay whispered, "How will we get these bog leapers, by the way?" "What do they enjoy eating?" he inquired. Connacht was right, they do love sheep and lamb, but they go crazy for mouflon, or the wild highland sheep. That very gamey scent and rich tallow drives them wild. Let's head back to village. I remember they had some domesticated ones. Llewellyn beamed. Finlay smiled, and they turned around to enter the village once again. Hopefully the farmers were still awake. He thought. It was already 2 past midnight. Llewellyn, Finlay, and Lachlann approached the village, right to the gypsy campfire where many of the locals were dancing and kissing the Shelta peoples. The Shelta were a polyamorous people who made quite a few coins from selling their love for a night. Both the Shelta and the locals of village were already drunk and passionately kissing, some even making love, for the loose-flowing clothes of the Shelta could easily be parted. They didn't even notice the trio sneak back in. Llewellyn whispered in Finlay's ear, "Our kind make love to repopulate from the last war. We mix blood with the different ethnic peoples of the Callionian Isles, because if we carry their blood, they would be much more hesitant to persecute us." Llewellyn smiled, but her eyes darted into Finlay's with most seriousness. Luckily, they found one villager asleep next to a barrel of smoked and salted mouflon meat. Most of it was cut into legs and back cuts, but there was also fatty cuts of belly fat. Llewellyn snagged a few pieces and a leather pouch from one of the sleeping villagers, but in turn placed a small handful of silver coins, freshly made from the giant's rings, into his pocket. "Hope he forgives us for the intrusion, and I think he will enjoy that handful of silvers," she smiled. Shelta learned how to pickpocket since they were youths, but some tribes only used such arts when desperately needed. As she snuck out of the encampment, she quickly darted to a large oak tree where Finlay and Lachlann was waiting. She quietly chuckled to herself, but then she suddenly noticed that Finlay and Lachlann were standing there in terror. "What's wrong? Ye see a banshee or something?" She quietly laughed as she ran up to give Finlay a playful smooch. She closed her eyes and gave him a gentle peck on the cheek, but was rudely hoisted into the air. She hung there dangling, a strong, long arm held her aloft. It was Connacht, and he appeared before her, face to face. The furious look on his face was rather intimidating. "Lass, did you just steal from that farmer?" he whispered, snarled, barely able to contain his anger. "I am trying to protect your Shelta people from getting butchered. You were too young to remember when the clan civil war broke out, and many of your kind were burned alive on wooden bonfires for being witches, he growled. Yes, yes, ya cantankerous old galligalus. My elders tell me this constantly. Unhand me, ya big brute, she quietly snarled. Connacht dropped her unceremoniously, and she hit the grass with a thud. Besides, I paid him with a few silver coins, she whispered. Connacht looked at her, groaned, and rolled his eyes. Fine, lass, but don't make a habit of it. I love you lot. I don't want to butcher a horde of angry Highland peasants for your shenanigans. He quietly groaned. She quickly got up, playfully punched him in the shoulder, leapt in the air, and farted on him. She then pranced as she sauntered away with Lachlann and Finlay, the three of them giggling the whole time. Connacht laughed to himself. Fucking harlequins. It was already 3 at night, and they approached the bog once again. Finlay took his axe and chopped down several branches from a dead oak. He then made a fire using dry heather brush, the branches of the dead oak, and his knife. To start the fire, he used the same axe knife and brushed it roughly against a flintstone. This quickly started a fire, and he took turns with Lachlan and Llewellyn, sharpening sticks that were as tall as a man, burning the tips and gathering them into bundles. They then quickly cooked the cold mufflon meat to heat it up, and used the gamey scent of it to perfume the air. This will drive them crazy, she whispered. Llewellyn helped guide them to a spot in the pond where she could hear a mixture of deep croaking, like massive toads, with a high-pitched and faint chirping, like that of wild bats. She could see them in the water, their auras aggressively glowing red as they swam with purpose, hunger and anger in the bog water. The water of the pond, gently but with power, had a wake left behind as they strange creatures patrolled the waters. She beckoned to Finlay to crawl up first. He had the bundle of sharpened wooden spears, and she pointed to various locations where Finlay crammed these makeshift spears into the earth, hidden within the foliage of ivy and various mulberry bushes. Finlay and Llewellyn couldn't help themselves and gathered a few of the overtly ripened mulberries. By Lugos, they were the sweet red grapes and blackberry notes, as well as rich flavors. Some even had a tad bit of a fermented aftertaste, but enjoyable. Nonetheless, Llewellyn then slapped Finlay to stop gorging himself. "Stop, ye gluttonous little piglet! Bring Lachlan here with the sizzling mufflon hammocks," she aggressively whispered into Finlay's ear. Finlay walked back and turned to where Lachlan was hiding. He beckoned to him silently, and Lachlan now snuck over to Llewellyn's hiding place. She gently grabbed the wild sheep skewers and hung them directly over the wooden pikes. "All right, ye handsome devils," she whispered. "Let's fling some stones into the nearby water to provoke them into fury." And the three of them gathered some flat river stones, then with both experience and strength, flung the stones who skipped across the pond water. Suddenly the water began to burble in fury. Mud and clumps of grass were flung into the air. Llewellyn could see their terrible forms. They had wings like massive bats, but bodies of toads as large as the giant mastiff hounds. Their strange tails looked like lizards, but tipped with vicious barbs. Suddenly they burst out of the water, gnashing and biting furiously with their rows of spiked teeth. Llewellyn quickly opened her arms and whispered, "Verleichte." Suddenly, a swarm of these furious aberrations leapt into the air and soared directly at the ropes with mutton hammocks. Each one of them snapped their massive jaws around the legs, ripped them right off the tree, only to directly impale themselves on the wooden pikes below. Wooden spear tips quickly plunged right through their wings, legs, and even stomachs with ease. "Now, lads, take those silver weapons and hack them to pieces." Lachlann and Finlay quickly charged out from cover. Finlay hefted Connacht's claymore from its sheath and hacked furiously with the great sword until he watched the wretched monster's wings and midsections already healing from the impaled wound. Lachlan ran right past, shouting, "Stop gawking, or they will regenerate. Hack them to shreds already." And he was wielding his sword and Finlay's broadsword in two different hands, wildly hacking and slashing at the impaled bog leapers, chopping legs, wings, tails, and heads off with each strike and slash. As the bog leapers attacked, Finlay would not be outdone, and used the long sword to split the monstrosities directly in half. Like lightning, more began to surge from the swamp and fly directly at them. Lachlann and Finlay were not caught off guard, and used their blades to block the incoming beasts. The monsters charged into those razor-sharp swords so aggressively they cut themselves into bloody pieces. The fighting was swift and furious, the sharp blades hacking, slashing, gutting, and disemboweling the beasts. Thankfully, their swords were etched with silver runes in the style of the Osterman clans, or with silver knotwork across the blades in the style of the Caledonians. The silver leaf on the blades made the wounds fatal. It was said that simple iron weapons actually could only temporarily cut these bog leapers into pieces before their parts would wriggle themselves together again. But silver burned them badly. The wounds stopped regenerating as the terrors bled their azure blue blood all over the marsh. Lachlann and Finlay looked about. Their wild wool-like hair was covered in the blue blood of Fae, as was their proud clan tartans. This was but a minor setback, for a whole village was liberated from these beasts. All of them quickly grabbed glass and porcelain vials and gathered the blue blood of the Fae, for it harnessed the very power of magic incarnate. Llewellyn knew this stuff could power the magic of the Coven or empower the low magic of Connacht into devastating explosions of devastating sorcery. Deirdre and Clydogna, Llewellyn's Coven sisters, would love to have this stuff around in spirits like absinthe, especially in times of desperate need, for life was harsh, unexpected, and short in the Samhian Isles. Suddenly she could hear something in the wind, a lass fair changeling child. She could more sense it in her mind. "Feed me those bog leapers, and I shall give ye a gift." The voice psychically transmitted into her mind. "Did you hear that, lads?" she said. Lachlann and Finlay looked at her strange. "Heard what?" "You little fool, ya." "I heard nothing," Lachlann sneered. "There." She pointed at a small mud island filled with sticks and reeds jutting out. She quickly grabbed two dead bog leapers. She marched up to the mud island and flung the corpses into the center of the island. The island quickly slammed shut as a massive set of snapping jaws clamped around the cadavers of the Fae beasts. Suddenly the monster reared, its head out of the water, and said, "How kind of you to feed me. Give me the rest of these irritating bog beasts, and I might give you a very special gift," in a gravely voice. The beast was long, like a giant eel, but with a huge and wide mouth, like that of a gargantuan catfish. But its teeth was truly terrifying, for they were serrated into spikes like backwards-facing tridents. Llewellyn shook with fear, thinking about how, if that bit someone, it could simply roll and saw their entire limb right off. "Who are you?" "What is your name?" she implored. The monster only replied, "I am the basket weaver, and I am enemy to the bog leapers." They finished hurling the dead bog leapers into the basket weaver's maw. Suddenly the creature rose to its full height, like some horrific snake of monstrous proportions. It spoke with a deep and cruel voice. "Come, children, check my maw. I believe a splint of bone is digging within my tooth, and it hurts so painfully," he said as he opened his giant mouth open. His gums had blotches of blackened flesh, and other areas of pinked flesh. Llewellyn smiled and said, "All right, mighty fish beastie, I shall easily do it, but in a mere moment's notice." She smiled, and she waltzed right into the monster's maw to inspect the wound in the monster's mouth. The basket weaver smiled as she walked in, and quickly snapped its mouth shut. Lachlann and Finlay were furious at the deception, and the monster laughed as it began to pull itself deep in the deeper parts of the nearby pond, intending to drown the sweet Llewellyn in the deep, murky waters below. The beast stopped its laughing and started to scream in agony, its eyes wild and wide open as it trashed about. Finally, it hefted itself up into the canopy of the trees and sneezed furiously. Llewellyn came flying out of the monster's mouth, covered in mucus, as she was laughing maniacally. The basket weaver screamed in agony, "What have you done, harlot?" "Oh, by the Tuatha de Danann, I am in agony," it screamed horrifically. Llewellyn simply laughed and said, "This is some of the strongest chili powder and horseradish sauce from all of Byzantia. No monster in these frigid northern lands has ever developed a taste for such fiery spice." She smiled. "Now, monster, fetch me my gift before my two brutish friends here hack your guts open and cut ye into wee pieces." She mockingly laughed. The basket weaver looked terrified and coughed up a strange item from its gullet, an amber-colored flute made from the tusk of a long-dead mammoth from the steppes of the eastern Altai. Llewellyn smiled. "Such a lovely flute of nature. Here, beast, drink this rich milk butter from my satchel. It should cure you of the burning spice." With that, she flung a small jug of the thickest cream into the poor basket weaver's maw, for which gave the monster a sudden level of respite. "Thank the Tuatha," the basket weaver replied. "I must return to my bog." And with that he sunk below the dark waters to form his basket trap once again. Later on that night, Llewellyn returned to camp, playing the most somber of dirges from this ancient flute, and she was hailed a heroine. It was early in the morning, somewhere around 4 a.m. Connacht smiled, for the lads returned from their first adventure and already cleared out the bog from these man-eating beasts. "I am proud of ye lads," he beamed, as the Caledonian villagers, Shelta nomads, and Ostermon mercenaries cheered and danced, their wagons getting packed with meats, drinks, trenches, and smoked cheeses for such a heroic act. Somebody was watching them. She hunched over, but would otherwise be tall. Her claws scratched the willow tree's bark in anticipation and hatred. Her warped children also took their other monstrous forms, like mastiff dogs in face with sagging folds of skin, but strong and heavy of body. They watched from the shadows of the marsh as the foolish humans celebrated their victory over the monsters of the marsh, who were their beloved monstrous pets.